Hey guys, it's Charlie, and this is Kerbal Space Program 1.1, and we are going to be doing a really lengthy, very thorough, and very involved playthrough of Kerbal Space Program. I am new to the internet as far as Kerbal Space Program is going, but I've got about 270 or so hours logged into the game. And I've got so many things I haven't done yet. So what I wanted to do is I want to do a special playthrough in career mode. And I'm actually I've been playing around making sure that the mods that I have are at least functional. There is some glitches and a little bit of bugs here and there, but I'm hoping they get ironed out. It's a new version of Kerbal Space Program, so there's bound to be some things we have to work out. But I want to do a new career mode. I'm going to call this Prior Interstellar Incorporated. And let's pick a flag. Pick a flag. I'm going to do this one. And I'm going to change game difficulty only slightly. Normal settings, everything normal settings, but we're going to do missing crews respawn. I'm going to turn that off. So if somebody dies, they really die. And this is a heavily modded game. And I'll go over what my goal is for this, and it's ambitious. So I don't think anyone's done it yet, but I want to try. So we are using, and you can read these little pop-ups as they come if you like. I'm going to make sure that they're turned off, but you can read them if you like. We are going to be using RemoteTech, and for those of you who are familiar with Kerbal Space Program and mods, you are probably, if you're familiar with mods, you're familiar with what RemoteTech does. But we'll get into the differences in a second. So this is, let's go to the tracking station. For those of you who are new to Kerbal Space Program, I want to introduce you to the game a little bit and sort of get you in touch with exactly why I think Kerbal Space Program is one of the best games you can play on PC. At least for those who are really into science. So again, you can read these, pause the video and read these if you want. So this is Kerbin. This is the planet Kerbin. And this is the basically the KSC, the Kerbal Space Center. Mission control, if you will, is this little red dot. And it's being represented by a little red dot because of RemoteTech as a mod. But again, we'll get into what that's all about in a second. So this is the planet Kerbin with some visual enhancements to make it look more realistic in terms of like what Earth would look like. And as we zoom out a little bit, you can see this is the moon, and these little circles are the moon's orbit. And Kerbin also has two moons. This is Minmus over here, and this is Moon over here. And each one of these bodies is a real celestial thing that we can go and explore and land on the whole thing. And we can collect science data from it, we can build bases on it, we can do all sorts of stuff. We can mine it for fuel resources, all sorts of cool stuff. Same thing with Minmus, same thing. You can go in here. Minmus is actually really kind of tiny, and it doesn't have a whole lot of gravity, so it's really easy to land on it, and it's really easy to take off from. So Minmus will play a very key role in us accomplishing our goals in the early game. And probably the mid game as well. Okay, so that is Kerbin's sphere of influence. There's two moons, but this is not all this is not the whole picture. And there's the sun, or Kerbal as it's called. But this is not the whole picture. This is the solar system, and there's a lot of different planets to explore. We have Duna, which is more of like a Mars representation. If I zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, there we go. Yeah, there's a lot of space here. So here's Duna, and Duna's got an atmosphere. There's some clouds and stuff here. Again, it's changed a bit from what really happens. The tops of these planets are showing green. I think this is like an aurora borealis kind of a thing going on, but it's just a graphical. It's not real. It's a graphical bug going on. But this is Duna, and Duna has a really big moon named Ike. And so there's Ike, kind of. So let's zoom out again. I'm only going to show you a couple because I just got to give you a sense of the scale of this game and sort of like how much there is to do. Here's Jewel. This is like the Jupiter equivalent in terms of like its position and stuff. And as I zoom in, there we go. All these different moons, right? It's got so many things to look at. And so here's Jewel. Again, more graphical glitching going on here. And Jewel is a gas giant, so we can't really land on it. But here's the goal, okay? And this is what I think no one's actually done on the internet yet, and I want to try and do it. We are going to have a base on every single planet in this solar system. That's the goal. But not just a base. No, not just a base. That's too easy. It's very difficult, especially with the mods I have installed. But two factors. One, it has to be a fully functional base. And that includes mining resources. And it has to be able to facilitate its own fuel to keep its energy and keep its everything running. And also to supply ships that are going to be passing through and ultimately may need to stop in near those bases to refuel if I need to. But the second thing it has to be able to do is it has to be self-sufficient. Which means if I place a Kerbal, or a person, if you want to call it that, if I place somebody in that base, and I have a life support system, I have a life support mod, so I have to keep people fed and watered and take care of their waste and all that stuff. If I place a Kerbal in that base, he has to be able to stay alive indefinitely. No running out of food or anything like that. Has to be completely self-sufficient. So those are the two things. Fully functional and completely self-sufficient. Now, right now, the goal is to put a Kerbal on every single planet, but I'm thinking, depending on how this is going, depending on how this goes as time moves on, because this might be hard enough as it is, I may also do a base on every celestial body, and that includes moons. So I may do it that way, which is really, really difficult. Exemption, though, there has to be an exemption to this, and that is, or an amendment to this, and that is because Jool and a few others, these are gas giants. You can't land on them. So, since you can't land on Jool, we're going to have to make sure that we have a fully functional and fully self-sufficient, still, base that is orbiting Jool. Or we could also take it to where I have to do it on Lathe instead, because Lathe is the other planet. It's one of Jool's moons, but it has an atmosphere and clouds and things. It's like the most likely candidate for a base. So I could say the base has to be on Lathe, but I wanted to do the planets, not the moons, and so a base around it as well. So an orbital station, if you will. And we're going to have lots of orbital stations anyway, because we need to, because RemoteTech is installed. So anyway, let's get out of the solar system. Incredibly, you're noticing some graphical glitching happening here as it loads. It's going to happen. They're going to get it ironed out. It's a new version of the game. Okay, so this is the Kerbal Space Program. This is the Kerbal Space Center. What you just saw was the tracking station where we can go and look through basically the solar system and track all of our ships that we currently have, all of our satellites and things like that. We don't have anything up there right now, so there was nothing showing. Later on, as we move forward from video to video, that map will become much more complicated looking, which is really great. Over here we have the vehicle assembly building. This is where we build our rockets. Over here is the spaceplane hangar. This is where we're going to build our planes, or basically any vessel that is designed to take off horizontally or sort of laterally. And these are vehicles that are designed to take up and go up, or take off and go up. Here's the Research and Development Center, and this is a really stripped down base because we're all basic. Because we have to research new technologies and advance ourselves all the way through. So we have almost nothing to work with as we start, and as we proceed, we will need to unlock new technologies and upgrade our facilities. There are 3 forms of currency in Kerbal Space Program. I'm going to go with credits. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what it's called right this moment as I get to it. I knew it before I started recording, but I'm just going to call these either space bucks, or you can just call them credits. These are 25,000 credits is what I have available to start. Then we have reputation. This will go into the green more and more as we become more well-known in a positive way, and it goes closer to the yellow as we become more well-known in a negative way, like from failing missions and things. And then we have science, and science is mostly it's just all lumped together into one big currency, and you spend science to unlock new technologies. So right here is where we start, and I have the Fog of Tech mod installed so that I can't see what is next until I unlock it, because I feel like that's a little bit more realistic. So if I get to basic rocketry, I unlock some new engines, I unlock liquid fuel, decoupler systems, I unlock this winglet. There's a whole bunch of different parts that I can get access to if I unlock them. Same thing with Engineering 101. I can spend it to get a better battery pack, a different type of decoupler that has sort of a Sepratron kind of thing. It has an ejection force that gets my stuff away from my ship faster, which is good. We have mobility enhancer, basically a glorified ladder, and rover wheels, which is pretty cool. Also, you'll notice that these are different. This tech, you'll notice that if you play Kerbal Space Program anyway, the tech is different because I have the community tech tree installed as well. So we're going to be going through a vastly different tech tree than the normal people who play Kerbal Space Program get to go to. We'll talk about more of these buildings later, but first we're going to go to the mission control. And mission control, in career mode anyway, is where we see our contracts. And we only have 4 contracts available right now, and we can, based on the level of our facilities, we can have 2 active at one time. So we have gather scientific data from Kerbin, which basically just get some science information. We have launch our first vessel, which pretty self-explanatory. Launch something. That's the contract. Pretty simple. We have escape the atmosphere, which I don't have the capability of doing right now, so I won't accept that. And orbit Kerbin. Well, if I can't get out of the atmosphere, I'm probably not going to be able to orbit either. But you can see that each contract has sort of a briefing to tell you a little bit about what it is, and these are never really written very seriously. We have the time in which it expires. We have the objective and whether or not we've achieved any of the goals. And some missions have multiple goals. These ones are really simple. They only have one goal. And you can see reward information. So we get an advance. When we accept it, like we're going to accept this one right now, we'll get $4,000 to start. And when we complete it, we'll get this much. So we'll get 1 science, 3 reputation, and 7633 credits, or space bucks, or whatever the hell it's called. All right, so gather scientific data from Kerbin. Accept that one. And we're of course going to launch a first vessel in this video, so there we go. We'll accept that one. And that's the most we can hold right now. We have 31,165. So let's go build something. Go to the vehicle assembly building. And this is where things get a little bit different for people who have played Kerbal Space Program, but perhaps haven't done something with how I'm doing it. So, or haven't done it the same way I'm doing it. So I have what's called unmanned before man. And because in the stock Kerbal Space Program, the first thing you can do, you can just put someone in a spacecraft and just take off. You have access to parachutes, you have access to capsules to store humans or to store Kerbals. You have pilots who can pilot things. You have all these things to start. I didn't think that was very realistic. I wanted it to be to where you had to really understand how things work before you could build things that can work that way. So we have to start with probes. We have to start with unmanned vessels because that makes more sense to me. And these unmanned vessels are going to be destroyed because I don't have access to parachutes and understanding how to deploy those things and whatever. So that's my rationality behind that. So unmanned before manned. This is called the Probodobodyne OKTO. This is our very first probe. So there's our unmanned probe, our little computer. And this is going to allow us to control the vessel. So let's put something, we don't have any liquid fuel, so we're gonna have to deal with one of 2 boosters. These are solid fuel boosters. I'll just attach that here. Solid fuel boosters, solid fuel in general, when you light it, it's lit. You can't shut it off. It's gonna run and run until it depletes. So once I activate this engine, I can't shut it off. So I'm gonna also reduce the thrust, and I'll show you why in a second, but I'm also going to need some science experiments because you'll remember if I open up my Capcom mod, which allows me to manage my contracts a little bit better, I think, because I get to see them without having to go all the way to mission control every time. You'll notice that our active contracts, if we go to the active tab, gather scientific data is one of our contracts. So I need scientific information. I need science experiments. In the science tab over here, I've got a barometer and I've got a thermometer. So these are things that I'm going to use to get the temperature and the pressure. These are just little things for science. Okay, so I'm going to put them there. Now, there's going to be a concern about balance of my craft, and I will talk about that in a second. But for now, let's just keep going. One of the things, like normally with regular Kerbal Space Program, if I didn't have it modded this way, I could launch this right now and I'd be able to control it and I'd be able to do whatever I want. Because in the stock Kerbal Space Program, the probes can communicate with mission control, like always. No matter how far away they are, no matter what, as long as they have battery life, they can you can communicate with them and control them wherever they are in the solar system. RemoteTech, the mod that I keep going back to, changes this dramatically and makes it much more realistic. Instead of saying, oh, it's an electronic probe, you can control it no matter what, RemoteTech says, okay, well, antennas that communicate this way, they have a limited function. Either they're directional or they're omni in all directions. So we should have, that diversity as well also apply to real world situations. Also, antennas tend to have a range to them. So if it's out of range, you shouldn't be able to communicate, because that doesn't make any sense. And also, wouldn't it be interesting if we made it even more realistic and said that the antenna needs to have somewhat of a line of sight in order to communicate with a ship? So that's what RemoteTech does. It makes it to where I have to have line of sight, be in range depending on the antenna I'm using, and also have battery life and everything. And then in addition to those three requirements, there will be a lag in the signal depending on how far away I am. So if I'm at the outer reaches of the solar system, I can't just hit left on my keyboard and all of a sudden my vessel goes left. I can't do that because there's a huge delay. It may take several minutes. It may take 10 or 12 minutes for my signal to reach that craft, which makes things much more realistic. So, going along that narrative, making things much more difficult to our purposes here, we're going to be using the Reflectron DP10. In order to control this probe, I'm going to need an antenna. This is one of the only antennas that come with RemoteTech that is capable of working in atmospheric flight. When you're flying in the atmosphere, you have lots of pressures and a lot of stresses on the vessel. And antennas, such as this Commutitron 16 here, just place that right here. This one, for example, when it's not deployed, doesn't communicate. Like, it's not working right now. I have to deploy it like this to have it be communicating. So now it would be functional. However, this is a fairly fragile antenna, and in atmospheric flight, it'll snap this antenna. This antenna will break. It won't work. So, in order to get this to work, be functional, I need to open this and use it in space, not in the atmosphere. But if I'm not using it in the atmosphere, how do I control the probe until it gets to space, right? So that's why we have this one. This one has a very limited range, doesn't have a whole lot of range to it, but it works in the atmosphere and it won't snap. So that's why we're using it. Okay, the next issue with building a craft in Kerbal Space Program, and this is kind of like a crash course, so a really, really simplified crash course for the first video of what we're doing and what I have to deal with, is balance and keeping things to where you don't have more weight, even the smallest amount of more weight on this side than I do on this side, than I do on this side, etc. It has to be balanced. Otherwise, it will start tipping and it'll start to be a little biased towards one direction, and I won't be able to control it very well. Or I'll have to constantly fight it. It's really hard. So what I'm gonna do with this is, now these science experiments may be what Kerbal Space Program calls massless. Some components actually don't have mass. Some things don't. It's just the way the game works, and we're gonna exploit that. I'm not sure if the science experiments are things that have mass or not. I know this antenna doesn't have mass. So what I'm gonna do is move the antenna on the booster, and I'm gonna take this through hot thermometer and I'll put it here. Then I'm gonna put the barometer on this side. Okay, so these are equal now. Now I can tell they're equal because if I hover over top of it, you can see the mass. It says 0.005 tons. And this also is 0.005 tons. So these weigh the same, and so they will be fairly balanced. And that keeps the balance. There you go. Okay, so the next thing is I'm gonna have to transmit science because I won't be able to recover this vessel. I don't have a way to keep this vessel safe once I launch it. It's gonna fall back down to the ground and explode because I don't have any parachutes. So I need to transmit the science that I'm gonna gather before I crash and burn. So in order to do that, I'm gonna need power for this antenna to transmit, and I don't have enough power. So I'm gonna have to go to utility, and I can see that I have a Z200 rechargeable battery bank available to me. I'm gonna place 2 of those, I think, on the top here. That should give me enough power to transmit the science, I think. But transmitting takes time, and this will probably run out of fuel and come back down to the ground before I can transfer all the science. So remember I was talking about earlier, solid fuel boosters, they are on and they stay on, and I can't shut them off. Well, I can also limit their thrust, and by limiting their thrust, I can keep them on longer. They'll burn less fuel. So as long as my thrust to weight ratio is still above 1, I will still go up in the air. I'll just stay going up in the air a longer period of time. This is Kerbal Engineer, and this is one of the, I think, probably the most essential mod anyone should have for Kerbal Space Program. Even if you're not a person who mods the game, just get this mod. That's it. Just that. If that's the only mod, if you can only have one mod, it's this one, Kerbal Engineer. This will tell me the number of parts on my craft, tell me the cost, which is also down the bottom left-hand corner as well. But most importantly, it tells me the mass of my craft, the specific impulse of each stage. In this case, the only stage I have is just this booster. And specific impulse is essentially a way of measuring the fuel efficiency of an engine. Thrust, I have currently 102 kilonewtons of thrust. I have my torque, I have my thrust to weight ratio, which is very important because it determines, well, whether or not I can actually lift off and get up off the ground, but also delta V, which is even more important. We'll talk more about what delta V is later. And then burn is how long my engine will be on with the current configuration. So as I adjust my thrust and bring it down, my torque is lowered, my thrust goes lower, my thrust to weight ratio goes down, and my burn time goes up, which means I'll burn for longer, which is good. So I'm thinking probably a 20-second burn is long enough to transmit, so long as this stays upright. It needs to stay upright. So to help it stay upright, I'm gonna actually put a couple of basic fins on this. And I think in order to do that, I'm gonna have to move the antenna again. So let's put this fin here, and I want it to be somewhat symmetrical. So let's put 3 fins on it like this. That should keep it straight up. Should keep it up. Shouldn't allow it to tip very much. So let's put the antenna, I don't need that many. Let's put the antenna back on. That should be good for our first craft. Nice little $5,700 craft, and it should get us a bunch of science. So let's go ahead and launch it and see what happens. Okay, it takes a quick second for it to load, and in Kerbal Space Program, yes, you can put the engine directly on the ground. So we are putting the engine directly on the ground. But later on, when we get to bigger crafts, I'm going to have it supported by some support beams, just because it makes it way easier to launch it reliably. And it's more realistic too. I'm just gonna do it mostly because it's realistic. I'm gonna try to keep things as realistic as possible. But for now, we don't have access to those, so we're gonna put it right on the ground. So we are using power right now. You can see the electric charge is 409 out of 410. So every minute I talk, I'm using my electric charge. So for the sake of that, let's do some science experiments right here on the ground. So I'm gonna right-click my thermometer, and I'm gonna log the temperature. I'm also gonna pin this here because I wanna do it in midair later. And you can see that I have a temperature scan from the launch pad. It's worth 2.4 science. Not a whole lot, but it's something. So let's go ahead and transmit. This antenna will transmit that science data to the mission control, and you can see that it took some battery power as well to do that, which is why I got extra batteries. Okay, let's go to the pressure barometer now, log pressure data. All right, now we've got atmospheric pressure scan from the launch pad, worth 3.6 science. Let's transmit that. And transmitting has this nifty little sound effect, which can get annoying after a while, admittedly. But that's just what RemoteTech does. So there we go. Okay. Are we ready? Let's launch this up. We have a connection, and you can tell we have a connection because this area up here is green. This is the launch time, and this little area below it is essentially the delay. So right now we have 0 delay at all. We are right on the launch pad. We're right at the KSC. There's no delay in our signal. And it's green, which means we have a connection, an active connection. There's also a built-in flight computer here, which will help us do certain things that we may want to do while we're in the air, and we're certainly going to take advantage of this because there's going to be lots and lots of instances where we need our craft to execute some sort of a command or some sort of a maneuver in space, but we will not have a connection to it at the time we need it to do it. So we'll need to program it to do it ahead of time, send that command to the computer so that it can be, prepared to do it on time, and then just hope for the best because it's going to have to do it without us actually engaging with it. That's what RemoteTech is doing to us. It's making us do a lot of extra stuff. Okay, are we ready? Let's launch this up. I'm going to turn SAS on. 3, 2, 1, and up we go. And we are going to have a little bit of a difficult time keeping it steady. It wants to tip. Let's log some temperature data and transmit that. It really wants to tip over. I think me holding this button is the only reason it's not tipping over yet. Oh, it's tipping over now. I don't think I can stop it. Well, atmospheric pressure scan here, and we'll do that, and that's it. Now this definitely went the wrong direction. I kind of wanted it to go the other way, but like I said, I didn't have any control over it. It was kind of just doing its thing. It's the first rocket. It also went fairly high, which is pretty good. We're up about 2,500 meters above the surface, which is pretty good. And we're starting to fall back down. Now I'm hoping that I can maybe put this into some sort of a roll. Here we go. And maybe this will keep it traveling in that direction. Oh, maybe not. Oh, crap. Here we go. Okay, what I want it to do is I want it to land to where it will not hit any of my buildings. If the first mission blows up one of my buildings, that's a really bad deal. So I'm trying to keep this to where I can get it. I'm hoping these wings will help with getting this to move. It is a little bit difficult to steer, just a little. When you're steering a craft in Kerbal Space Program, you're not actually looking at the craft. At least you shouldn't be. You should be looking at this nav ball down here because this is basically your guide as to where you're at. Because my camera angle could be any angle, and left is not necessarily left relative to this, but left will always be relative to this. So yeah, when you're flying a craft in Kerbal Space Program, you're looking here, and you can see some of the wonderful graphical glitches that are happening. Boom. Okay, well, that is our first flight. It was fairly successful. And you can see we've now lost connection with our craft. Pretty easily lost connection, actually. Okay, well that was our first flight. It looked pretty successful to me. It didn't. None of our buildings caught on fire, so that's good. And yeah, we have our flight results here. Cool. Let's go back to the Space Center then and see the results of our labor. So after a successful mission, that is recovering your vessel, there would normally be a prompt on my screen that says, oh, you've done this, and that's great. But since technically I didn't recover my vessel, there's no real mission to say that I succeeded with. But I did succeed in what I wanted to do. We have 108,000 credits now because we passed those 2 contracts. We got science, and we flew our first craft, even though it crashed. So that completes the contract. 108,000 credits is what we have now. We have a tiny bit of reputation for that, which is okay. And 29 science. And that's the most important currency as far as I'm concerned, is science. Let's go to the research and development. And with 29 science, we can unlock some stuff. So let's unlock basic rocketry. All right, cool. And let's unlock engineering 101. And it looks like we have a little one here. Structural parts. It only costs 1, but I'm not sure I need any of them yet. I'm gonna hold off on that. And we have survivability here. Now survivability is where we get our parachutes, which is good for recovering our vessel and saving some money. We also get a bigger battery, which is good. Unfortunately, survivability costs 24 science, and since we've spent money on these, we only have 13 left. So we're not going to be able to, well, we can get stability. Yeah, this only costs 8, and it gives us better wings, which is actually a good thing. So let's get that. Okay. And modular wings. Ooh, lots of wing parts there. Wow. Not sure we need those yet. When we start building planes, that will be useful, but we don't need those yet. Structural parts I don't think we need yet either. Okay, so that's all we're gonna unlock. So let's go ahead and take a look at mission control real quick. Lots of contracts available now. So we can take a maximum of 2 at a time, but if we upgrade our facilities, we can take more at a time, which is pretty good. And I tend to do mission control. I tend to upgrade this facility first all the time. It's just the way I do it. So I'm gonna right click this. It says upgrade, 75,000 credits to upgrade. Actually, it looks like euros. Yeah, maybe these are actually euros. I don't know. So here we go. If we have maximum active contracts are 2. If I upgrade the building, I'll be able to do 7, and I'll be able to do flight planning so long as I have the tracking station upgrade done as well, which is really good. So let's upgrade that, and this structure is now upgraded. I have 33,909 left. Plenty. Okay, so now I can accept more than 2. Not that I want to yet, but that's usually just the first thing I do because I can get advances on other things. Okay, so we can test some equipment. We can try and escape the atmosphere, which is totally doable now. We can test the booster. We can do a whole bunch of stuff, which is what we're gonna do, but we're gonna do that in the next video. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching. If you think this game is interesting, and I know it doesn't really look all that interesting yet, but my God, like, give it a chance, guys. It's gonna get super crazy. Okay, thanks.